So, Nick, UFC 304 is officially in the books, and it was kind of a mixed bag of opinions as far as the fight card from top to bottom is concerned.
Right.
I want to touch on the three fights that I think everybody was looking most forward to, and that is Paddy Pimblett versus Bobby Green. Obviously, Tom Aspinall, Curtis Blaydes, Tom Aspinall really coming into his own and staking his claim as being probably the best heavyweight on planet Earth right now.
Right.
And then Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad. I really want to dig into the X's and O's of that fight because I think there was a lot to break down from a technical perspective as far as Belal is concerned. You know, Paddy and Tom, there's not as much meat on the bone as far as breaking down technique because the fights were short, but we did get to see 5 rounds out of Belal Muhammad. And to me, this was the best Belal Muhammad that we have seen to date.
Right.
He was able to really shut down some of the things in Leon's game that he does the best. And I think what Leon does best leading into that fight was his range management and his ability to keep really good fighters, especially good grapplers, good wrestlers, Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington. You know, both of those guys probably have a more extensive wrestling pedigree than Belal Muhammad, and he was able to keep them at bay for the most part. And Belal did some things that really shut down that game for Leon. He took the fight right to him. He didn't allow him to do a lot of lateral movement, which is what a wrestler needs to get away from the takedown. Belal did an excellent job of pinning Leon against the cage and working those takedowns from there. Some really beautiful, you know, double leg takedowns. There was a few where Leon was slammed on his head in one of those takedown attempts, or one of those takedowns that was secured. So I want to talk about what Belal did right, and then I do want to touch on what Leon did wrong, because I think Leon didn't show up with the proper game plan for this fight, and he really paid dearly for it. So what were your thoughts, and what do you think Belal did that the other fighters have not been able to do against Leon?
Well, I think after last night, like you were saying earlier, we are going to have to remember the name. Belal Muhammad is now our champion, and he did it in dominant fashion. Leon Edwards looked like a world beater after his last couple of title defenses, and you're like, all right, I don't really see anybody until maybe a Rachmanov or maybe potentially an Ian Gary if he keeps going up the way he's going. I don't see anybody giving Leon a problem until one of those guys comes, and that's simply because of a size thing. I think that those guys are longer and they're decent at striking. They would be able to cause some problems for Leon, but that's not the case. Belal Muhammad went out there with a great game plan, and one thing that stuck out to me from the very first bell was the pressure. And a lot of times we'll hear people talk about pressure fighters, right? You hear that all the time. You're either a pressure fighter, you're a counter striker, whatever it is. If you want to train your fighters to be pressure forward fighters, watch the Belal Muhammad fight. And a lot of times people mistake pressure with volume.
Yes.
They mistake pressure with forcing things. And Belal wasn't really doing that. He was really good at pushing Leon backwards, just like you were saying. Leon was not circling. He was not moving laterally at all. He would move straight backwards. And really from the beginning of the fight, it looked like Leon was flat-footed. And that was a big issue because I knew that Belal Muhammad, having trained with Khabib and already coming into that training camp with a great pedigree of wrestling and grappling, I knew that if Leon wound up near the cage, if he wasn't making adjustments and getting out of there quickly, Belal would eventually find the takedown. I didn't think it was going to be that easy for him to take Leon down, but the reason he had so much success in the takedowns is because of Leon's defense. And what stuck out to me, and you'll see it from time to time, you know, Sean Strickland sort of made it famous, the Philly shell in MMA, and it's a bit of a modified shell, but at the same time, it looks like it. Leon was doing that, but he was doing it in a more defensive way and almost a risky way, because he would bring his hands like this.
Yeah.
And as soon as your hands go like this and you're fighting a wrestler, you have big problems, because the one thing you need to do when somebody changes levels and shoots in on you is your arms got to go down, and you have to start defending the shots. Leon was so concerned about the strikes that were coming because Belal was having more success than I think most people, including Leon's camp, thought he was going to have on the feet. Since he was having so much success, Leon started shelling up that way, which opened up the immediate level change into a clean entrance almost every single time Leon shot. And I'm not saying this was like one of those situations where Leon almost got out of all of them and it just happened to be grappled by a better grappler. No, he was, every time Belal shot, his head was below Leon Edwards' waistline, and his hands every time seemed to grasp together behind Leon's legs. And I don't care if you're, you know, a collegiate level wrestler, or if you're, somebody who's been running the UFC for a very long time. If a wrestler that knows what they're doing gets that much, that deep on you, you're in trouble. And Belal Muhammad was able to just find that, it seemed like whenever he wanted to. And a couple of times we saw Leon Edwards get it back to the feet, or after the round ended, we'd see a fresh round start where he was on the feet. But the same thing would happen again and again. You'd get walked backwards and then you get put on the ground. And in my opinion, I just think that Belal Muhammad came out with a perfect game plan to tire out Leon Edwards, sort of break him mentally, and then just continue to bring his onslaught of offense and top control and dominant pressure. And that's what won him the fight. Do I think Belal had the best fight of his career? Yes. Do I think Leon Edwards also had one of the worst fights of his career, at least in recent memory? Yes. But I also think that styles make matchups, and Leon Edwards, even if he does get a rematch with Belal Muhammad, which the UFC and me, I'm not really bullish on seeing that happen next. I think they're going to give Leon some time. I think they're also going to insert new blood into the top of the division. So I think Belal is going to be the champ for a little while longer. He's going to fight some different people, get some parity in there, not have an immediate rematch, which is going to be good for both him and Leon Edwards, because now we've seen them fight a couple of times. They're 1-1. There's something to be said for a rubber match, and I think we need to see that at some point. But I'm not really the kind of person that's calling for that immediately. It was a dominant performance for Belal Muhammad. And look, 170, just like that, changes guards, and now we've got a whole new lineup of fights that we could see at the top of the division, especially for the belt. I'm really excited for it, but yeah, Belal Muhammad needs a lot of credit, because even though he was getting boozed the entire night, he came out there, fought like an all-star, and now he's the world champ.
Yeah, and I will correct you on just one thing. They're not 1-1. They're 1-1 because Leon is, at least, because of the no contest. So I think that's why they're not so apt to make this immediate rematch. And it was 25 minutes of a domination. You know, had Belal come out there, and we don't know Belal for knocking people out, obviously. But if he came out there and he were to just get a quick KO of Leon, or something were to happen and he were to get a submission of some kind, I could see them maybe turning it around and doing a rematch, especially if Leon was having a lot of success early on and then just something went wrong. We see that happen, and Leon's been the champ for a little while now, and so he's somebody who would be in the running for getting a rematch. But when you get dominated like that, and yes, I know Leon had a very good third round, and they kind of traded that position in the third and fourth round. You know, Belal came back and put him in the same body triangle that he was in for the third round. And, I think you really laid out what Belal did really well. And I'll just add one or two things to it. One, I think his hand speed surprised Leon.
Yeah.
And it surprised me.
And his shot selection. Some of those uppercuts were nice and hooks and whatnot.
Yes, absolutely. That uppercut that he landed in the first round really got Leon's attention. And he's like, okay, this guy came to strike.
Right.
I think Leon wasn't really respecting Belal's shots and his striking whatsoever, which I think was a costly mistake, because even from the first bell, Leon usually is a fighter who will come out, he throws a lot of feints, he's long, he's very good behind his jab. His straight punches are some of the best at 170.
Agreed.
But he just stepped right into range with Belal and started trading, which is not Leon's style.
No.
He's not Max Holloway. It's not, they're different fighters, different strikers have different styles.
Right.
And Leon, I believe, is one of the cleanest strikers in the UFC, but he didn't bring that tool with him last night. He just brought kind of a stand and trade mentality, because you're not in my league as far as striking goes.
Right.
And Belal quickly showed him that he's making some real improvements, even at 36 years old, in his striking. And then when you start to get tagged on the feet and you start to bring your hands up, as you said, in a defensive position, or you're shelling or whatnot, then it just opens up the grappler's potential for whatever they want. And we saw some beautiful, entries, level change entries. We saw some high crotches. We saw Leon get slammed on his head at one point, which looked a little bit scary. Yeah, those things we've seen. Rose Namajunas comes to mind. Like those types of things have ended fights before. So I think Belal really was, had a perfect game plan that he executed well. And I know he's not from Dagestan, he's not Islam Makhachev, but he did spend some time with Khabib. And one thing we know about those guys and the way they train is they have a game plan, they have a strategy, and unless they run into just a wall of adversity, they don't veer from it. They do what they came to do. And Belal Muhammad had a far better strategy than Leon Edwards did last night, and he executed it, which is even more important than having the strategy. He executed his game plan far better than Leon did. So I think you're right. I think that Belal Muhammad is probably going to move on to somebody other than Leon. Leon's probably going to have to win one more to get back in there. He was the champion for a couple of defenses, so if he can knock off a top 5 guy.
Maybe a Colby Covington or something.
Yeah, if they want to run that rematch, which I don't see them really doing. I don't see them putting Colby in there for that. Maybe they try to build an Ian Gary off of him or something like that.
Right.
You know, Leon versus Gary, I think, would give Leon more of that striker stylistic matchup that he's looking for. You know, so I could see them doing something along those lines. But I think Belal is moving on to other people. Maybe Shavkat Rakhmonov, which from a stylistic perspective, we can break down in a different video.
Give me that all day.
Yeah, I would love to see that fight. I think it would be an excellent fight.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to transition now into the co-main event, which there's not nearly as much to break down. So I want to look forward to what's to come more than what happened. Just briefly touching on what Tom did. I mean, Tom is showing that he's 6'5", 251 pounds with the speed of a featherweight.
Right.
And that is a very scary thing. This is not your dad's heavyweight division anymore.
No.
This is not Roy Big Country Nelson, you know, in there banging it out. He's just a 185er that doesn't want to cut weight. No, these guys are big. They fill out the frame appropriately, but they're athletes. And Tom Aspinall is an athlete to the highest of levels. One thing that Conor McGregor made famous is one of his most famous lines. You know, what is it? Speed beats power, and
precision beats power. Timing beats speed.
It's been so many years. I'm drawing a blank on the quote itself. Precision beats power, and timing beats speed. Tom Aspinall comes to mind when you think of that, because when you think of Curtis Blaydes, you think of the chin susceptibility. And you know, in our MMA Hangout episode, Bob Perez, who's one of the few coaches that can say they've got a win over Curtis, talked about that and how Derek Lewis was able to land that big power shot.
Right.
Curtis has been knocked out by Derek. He's been knocked out by Francis twice. He's been knocked out by Sergey Pavlovich. And my prediction was that Tom would finish him, but it wouldn't be because he just throws this monster uppercut or he hits him with a power hook. It would be because he's in and out and he lands a crisp shot, which is exactly what happened. The follow-up was really good. Tom is a scary fighter for anybody, including John Jones.
Yeah.
You know, I know that John is fighting Stipe, and I know that Stipe Miocic is arguably one of the best heavyweights of all time. I understand from a business perspective why John and the UFC are doing that fight. However, there's a lot of talk of Alex Pereira moving up, the triple champ status, all that. It's kind of hard to me after the performance that we saw last night to deny Tom Aspinall a shot at the undisputed title, whether it be Stipe pulling off the upset of all upsets or what we all think is going to happen. John Jones is going to get his hand raised. It's hard to have a guy who's winning, but not just winning, like knocking out top contenders.
Defending belts
in the first round, barely getting touched, defending belts. How do you allow him to just keep going down the road of interim and not go and get his crack at undisputed? So to me, as much as, and anybody who watches this channel knows that I am as big of a Poatan fan as there is out there. I have drank a gallon of the Alex Pereira Kool-Aid. But that said, we have to cool our jets just a little bit.
Right.
Got to give the big man his due. Tom Aspinall deserves to fight the GOAT. And I think that is a compelling matchup. And by the way, I don't subscribe to everything everybody's saying that John's not going to take that fight because he can't win that fight. I do believe John can win that fight.
Yeah.
John Jones can pull a win out of almost almost thin air. You know, John Jones is one of the best, if not the best, mixed martial artists that the world has ever seen. So to say that Tom would walk through him, I think would be a mistake. To say that Tom can beat him, I 100% agree with that. But for sure, one thing I agree with 1,000% is that Tom should be given the chance.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, like you said, there wasn't that much time of a fight for us to break down, but we did get a lot, and we saw a lot. And when you're dealing with heavyweights, especially knockout artists, you kind of have to take what you can get because anything can happen. It's 3 pounds of pressure on the chin, and somebody's going to sleep. And when you've got a guy like Tom Aspinall, who's a very precise striker, like you said, and precision beats timing, or precision beats power, timing beats speed.
Now you mess up with the quote.
Exactly. But he was showing a nice balance of precision and speed. And I think we were talking about it leading up to this fight. The biggest difference in Tom Aspinall's game as opposed to all the other heavyweights, likely all the heavyweights we've seen before. And then I think now we're going to see a new breed of body types at heavyweight, and Tom Aspinall is sort of leading the charge on that.
Yeah.
But I think Tom Aspinall went out there and you know, there's something to be said for home court advantage. Some people see it as a disadvantage. When you've got guys like Tom Aspinall who know how to rise to the occasion, he's now the world champion. And look, whether there's interim written on it or not, if you're the more active champion in your division, and in a lot of people's eyes, you are the champion.
Yeah.
I think Tom Aspinall, there's a little bit of an asterisk next to him because it says interim, but at the same time, people are looking at these fights and these number one contenders that he's just smashing, like #1 contenders for a title fight. And they're seeing Tom Aspinall go out there and beat him in the first round. He's still got his 100% finish rate. So I think Tom Aspinall is doing everything right. And I think he is 100% the future of the division. And it won't be too long before he's talked about as a heavyweight GOAT. I don't think he's going to surpass John as a GOAT ever. But if Stipe Miocic is considered the heavyweight GOAT right now, Tom Aspinall, if you look at the body of work that he's done, and then you look at the roster at heavyweight, I don't really see a lot of people giving him trouble other than John Jones. I just feel like even and Alex Pereira, that would be a close fight, but I think Tom would be the favorite. So I think Tom Aspinall going out there moving the way he was moving is a problem for John Jones. And the fact that John Jones isn't near as active could be an issue, because when we saw John out there last time, it wasn't that we didn't get to see enough to see how good he actually is, but we did see, his speed. We saw his frame moving at heavyweight. And that was interesting to me because he's never really moved 250 plus pounds. He's never really moved that kind of weight around. And so he did give up a little bit of his speed. It didn't really matter against Cyril Gane. He was able to get the fight where he wanted it and get it, make quick work of Cyril. Tom Aspinall is a little bit different because I think Tom Aspinall's jiu-jitsu and his grappling all around is very high level. And I also think that Tom Aspinall has the speed advantage and a unique striking skill set that is more troublesome than Cyril Gane's would be for John Jones. Cyril Gane is a kickboxer in a lot of ways. He basically moves like a kickboxer, not really the Thai style, but he stands very straight up. And he doesn't tend to move in and out like Tom Aspinall does. Tom moves really well in the pocket, scores what he needs to score, keeps his eyes really sharp on what might be coming his way, knows how to defend, and then ultimately can get himself back out of there using his feet. We say it all the time. Hands get all the credit and feet do all the work. Tom Aspinall is a great example of that because he goes in there, he gets some great stuff done with his hands, and then he's right back out with his feet. He's moving around laterally.
Yeah, very elusive.
And then all it takes is one or two. And Curtis Blaydes, look, his striking looked pretty good in the short amount of time we saw it. He was landing a couple of things, and Tom Aspinall early on looked like he was admiring his work. Once you're in the pocket and you start scoring, it's hard to not look at it and be like, oh man, I just landed that pretty flush. And you kind of just sit there and look at it and like in amazement of yourself. But then something can come back your way. And Curtis Blaydes was able to make him pay for those a couple of times, which changed everything about Tom Aspinall's entries and his exits. And as soon as I noticed Curtis Blaydes start to catch on to what Tom was doing, Tom immediately flipped the game plan. And that's why you have to be able to adjust on the fly. You have to have a high fight IQ. You have to be an intelligent person. Tom Aspinall showed all of that last night. I think Tom Aspinall goes out there and only keeps evolving because he's so young for the heavyweight division. I think what we're going to see out of Tom Aspinall over the next 5 years is going to be nothing short of historical and going to wind up in the record books. A lot of what he's going to do is going to be very impressive. So Curtis Blaydes, anytime you need somebody who's a top five, just a lifetime top five heavyweight, you call Curtis Blaydes. But when you can get him out of there in 1 minute, which is better than most everybody else can do in the heavyweight division, you have to start looking at just how dominant Tom Aspinall is and where he needs to go from here. Because leading up to this fight, I was like, we were talking to Kevin Holland about it. He was like, I don't think if Tom wins and John wins that Tom should fight him because legends should fight legends. And I agree with that to some degree, but at the same time, I'm not overseeing John Jones' fight. I want to see him fight Stipe, but I feel like that one's a little bit of a I don't want to call it an exhibition or a gimme, but it just feels a little bit easier than what he should be going through. John Jones is the GOAT. He needs to fight the best people in the world. So I think Tom Aspinall is the right guy. And the last thing I'll say about, basically your GOAT status or whatever, we like to put those types of conversations out there into the world and see what people have to say. But it would be kind of nice to put that conversation to bed for the time being. And if we could say John Jones is conclusively the GOAT, there's nobody better. I think he does need to beat the champions of old, which he did on his rise up, the champions of today, which he did while he was the champion at 205, and then the champions of tomorrow, which without a doubt is Tom Aspinall. And for me, those if he can beat Stipe Miocic, he's taking care of everybody he needs to take care of at heavyweight. If he beats Tom Aspinall, now we're talking about a different level. And I just think that John Jones is a fierce competitor. He knows he's never lost a legitimate fight in his life. And especially with the 12-6 now being overturned, he's trying to get that fight overturned. So I think that John Jones, the competitor side of him is going to come back out. And I think we see Tom versus John sometime in the middle of 2025 because that's the fight that people want to see. I don't think John Jones is ready to retire yet. And I think Tom Aspinall is becoming the most undeniable #1 contender out there, especially when he's got a strap on his waist.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said.
Thank you.
And I actually am not done seeing John fight either. I mean, if John says, look, I'm worth over $20 million, I'm calling it a career, I'm going to go enjoy my life with my family, that's fine. I wouldn't be mad at that. But John Jones, the truth of the matter is he just turned 37.
Right.
That's not that old for a heavyweight. He could have another 2 to 3 years at heavyweight if he would like to do that.
For sure.
Tom Aspinall is a future Hall of Famer. To grab an interim belt that young, and we'll just say, you know, obviously it's the interim, but as I think we all agree, Tom Aspinall is the active defending heavyweight champion.
Right.
So call it what you will, call it interim, call it undisputed, I don't care. Tom Aspinall is the heavyweight defending champion in my eyes. To be the heavyweight defending champion at such a young age, I think he's got a real career ahead of him. And I only think he's going to get better. And I think the John Jones fight is totally different than the Cyril Gane fight because, for John Jones, let me rephrase that. Cyril Gane for John Jones is way easier than Tom Aspinall would be because I think Tom can match him in the grappling. He might not have the wrestling pedigree, obviously does not have the JUCO, champion experience that John has, but he's very good at grappling. He's extraordinarily good at jiu-jitsu. So I think even if he did end up on his back, we could see some nice reversals. We could see some exchanges. He's a big body. He didn't have to spend 3 years bulking himself up to get to heavyweight. He's a natural heavyweight.
Right.
So I think the fight's very intriguing. I hope that's what they make. Alex Pereira is going to be around for a little while. We all like to see Alex fight. Izzy's coming back. Who knows? Maybe if Izzy can beat DDP, they do the trilogy MMA match at 205. There's things for Alex to do that are fun. There's Magomed Ankalaev, who that wouldn't break the bank as far as pay-per-view numbers are concerned, but Magomed's certainly a deserving fighter.
Good for legacy,
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I want to talk now about a fighter on the come-up.
Okay.
And he's no longer a prospect. He's no longer a hype train, as Kevin Holland corrected me in our podcast the other day. Paddy Pimblett is a good fighter.
Yeah.
The guy brings something that's an X factor.
Yeah.
When his music hits the speakers, especially in Manchester, you feel it.
Yeah.
You feel the vibe. You feel the big fight energy. And last night we saw the skills.
Yeah.
We felt that X factor for a while, but we haven't really seen the skills.
Right.
Bobby Green is no slouch on the feet. We've seen Bobby Green get in there and mix it up with some of the best strikers that the UFC has at 155 and do quite well with it. Paddy looked very composed on his feet last night, and he did what a lot of really good veterans do. He capitalized on a mistake of his opponent. Yeah. Bobby shot, which I have no idea why he did that.
Yeah.
But it took Paddy's noticing what was going on, quickly locking up that guillotine, realizing that the foot was there to clear the leg, immediately cleared that leg, locked up the triangle, and that was all she wrote. And if the triangle wasn't enough, he did have an armbar that would have snapped Bobby's arm had he implemented it.
Almost looked like he did when Bobby was asleep, sort of.
Yeah. Bobby was out cold, so very impressed with Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah.
He called out Renato Moicano.
Love that.
Show Me the Money podcast, Matty Betts, those guys.
Shout out to the boys.
Shout out to you guys. Yeah, we love those guys. That was a great call out. And I hope that Moicano gets that fight because it's big for both of them. Moicano does have a fight lined up with Benoit Saint-Denis. And this is why a Paddy the Baddy versus Moicano fight does make sense. Because Paddy's going to enter the top 15 now.
Right.
And I think the fight makes sense whether he loses to BSD or wins. Because if he loses, then Moicano and him will be similar in the rankings. Right. They're both personalities. They're both big names in the sport. People like both of them. People want to see both of them fight. But if Renato Moicano can pull the upset and get past BSD, which is a tall task, but I think it's possible, then Moicano is top 5 material.
Right.
And now you have Paddy the Baddy coming in to fight a top 5 guy.
Right.
If he can beat him, then you're talking about a guy who's a title contender. So the fight against Moicano makes sense. The BSD fight's around the corner. If I'm Paddy's team, I wait to see what happens with that fight, and then I try to get in there with Moicano towards Christmas or maybe the beginning of 2025. I love that fight. Want to get your thoughts on that fight, but first, what did you think of Paddy's performance in rising to the occasion?
Yeah, I love the fight, love the call out, and that will be an entertaining matchup. But when you're talking about Bobby Green versus Paddy, it felt to me, and I was going back and forth on my predictions. Unfortunately, I settled in on Bobby Green just because I thought for sure Bobby was going to keep the fight standing. And Paddy being, even though he's a great grappler, he's very decorated in jiu-jitsu and knows what he's doing on the ground, when he's fighting in front of his home country's crowd, And look, we've seen him in the UFC now for 6 or 7 fights. He doesn't go out there and do his jiu-jitsu. And if you were like us, we were paying attention to Paddy the Baddy before he made it to the UFC. And Paddy was a submission ace. Yeah. He was submitting everybody. And at some point, I was like, all right, I like Paddy. I'm along for the ride on the Paddy the Baddy journey. I want to see how far this guy can go. I was a little bit like everybody else, like, yeah, he might still be a hype train. It's still to be determined. His fights are a little bit mismatched, but at the same time, he hasn't been in here all that long. So let's bring him up the right way. It's not his fault that he got signed to Barstool at a young age and very early in his career, and he started making money that way and really started making a lot of noise worldwide. You can't say that a guy that just because he's really popular and seems to have good skills deserves to be in there with the top 5 in the world. You have to bring him in the right way. And I think 6 or so fights is great before he gets his ranking. And now people are going to see the number on his next to his name and the fact that his name is one of the biggest draws in the lightweight division, which is saying something because the lightweight division has
some big names.
Yeah. Right. That's the prettiest girl in the entire roster, right? Yeah. The lightweight division is the most sought after, most difficult division, and it's got the most stars in it. But Paddy the Baddy is sort of shining through in his own way and competing with the guys at the top of the division. So I really did like what I saw out of Paddy, and I want to see more of the jiu-jitsu style that we saw out of him. And I love that you said he didn't force it because that's not what he did at all. He didn't go out there trying to look for a takedown. Bobby Green didn't like the striking that Paddy was able to land on him, and that's why you had a striker like Bobby who loves to keep it on the feet, immediately looking for a shot in the first round. And when you talk about the guillotine, a lot of people tell you, MMA coaches, and they're not wrong for this, never jump the guillotine. Unless you know for sure you've got it. And even if you feel like you've got it 99%, don't jump it because it's too risky. You can wind up in a bad position. MMA fighters are really good scramblers, and it's just too much of a nightmare to deal with. Don't worry about it. But Paddy clearly has a really dangerous guillotine. And once he felt that he had his hands around Bobby Green's neck, he knew it was all over. He jumped the guillotine, immediately started to throw his legs around to keep Bobby inside of his guard. It was a thing of beauty. I was really impressed by Paddy the Baddy. He goes out there in front of his home crowd, and just like we were saying earlier in this video, some people see it as a home crowd advantage, and some people see it as a home crowd disadvantage. And I always wonder with a fighter, like Manchester crowd, they seem great, and UK fighters notoriously do well when they're fighting on home soil. But you never know what's going to happen until the guy actually walks out there. But I think after last night, it's safe to say Paddy the Baddy has arrived. People see him now not just as a big name, but as a big talent and a big threat in the division. And there's going to be more people wanting to get those fights because they see not only the big name, but they see the rank next to him. I think Moicano is the perfect next step up in Paddy's career. I don't think that's an easy fight. I think Moicano might come in as a slight favorite, actually. Yeah. And for me, that one's an interesting fight stylistically just because Moicano is very good on the ground. Moicano is very good everywhere. And while I'm not discrediting Bobby Green or any of his skills because I know he's a great fighter, and to be in the UFC and fight the caliber of fighters that he's had and still be on the roster means he's a very good, well-rounded fighter. But I think stylistically, Moicano brings more to the table for Paddy to have to deal with. I think, if you take Moicano to the ground, it's not so easy just to get him out of there. And when you talk about striking with Moicano, he's sort of a wild card. You never know what you're going to get. He'll throw some crazy stuff at you. And Paddy does the same thing, which leads me to believe that the fight will be fireworks when it does happen. I feel like it's all but signed. We'll see BSD and Moicano do their thing, and I think they'll just keep Paddy chilling until about the end of the year. They'll put him on a big card, maybe an MSG, or a big card out in Vegas right at the end of the year. They'll really try to push him in front of the American audience. And then by 2025 starts, I think we're going to see Paddy make a legit run down the rankings. Now, how he does in those fights is totally up to how well he prepares and how good of a fighter he becomes. But at the same time, when you're moving like that and you've got all this, momentum behind you, and now you're able to engulf people in this moment of fight. I'm fighting Paddy the Baddy. This is like a crazy moment for me. If he's able to freeze his opponents a little bit like that and go out there and continue to just rip through people, I think the future is very bright for him. And I know he's in a hard weight class, but I feel like in about 3 fights, we could see him in there with some very meaningful names and some very high-level fighters, also possibly in the top 5. So a lot to be said for Paddy the Baddy. I'm really happy to see his success. And look, the people out there love him. The people over here seem to love him. Everybody's got their wig on. And Paddy the Baddy, look, he's the real deal. The hype train is real.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say he's a legitimate top 15 contender at this point. And I'll leave you with one alternative to Moicano. Let's say, for example, he does go in there and suffers a brutal knockout to somebody like BSD,
Right.
that could potentially, delay things. You mentioned jumping the guillotine.
Yeah.
There is one guy that wants one more fight.
Oh, man.
Dustin the Diamond Poirier versus Paddy
Wow.
Pimblett. That fight to me would be a big, big marquee fight.
Very
Probably co-main event on a pay-per-view card. Dustin Poirier is the legend of,
Right.
of the generation that's just coming to an end. What better way? And a lot of people don't like Paddy.
Right.
And a lot of people that don't like Paddy are also the same people that love Dustin.
Right.
So that fight makes a lot of sense from a marketing and entertainment perspective.
Right.
A lot of people want to see somebody beat Paddy, and they would love for that somebody to be somebody like Dustin the Diamond Poirier.
True.
Paddy fans want to see him get wins over the marquee fighters. Bobby Green was the first step in that direction. Tony Ferguson, we all know where Tony's career has gone the last few years. Dustin Poirier just fought for a title.
Right.
He looked pretty dang good doing it, by the way. It was
Yeah.
against Islam Makhachev, but certainly not a performance to scoff at. I think that if Moicano doesn't work out, and we do know that Dustin wants one more. Yes, there's Nate Diaz out there, but who knows if he's ever going to come back to the
Right.
UFC. Do we really want to see Conor in there with Dustin again? Do we really want to see Justin Gaethje in there
Or
with
maybe a
Dustin
Colby.
again?
Yeah.
Maybe Colby Covington, but my appetite for that's not huge. I don't hate the idea of Dustin Poirier versus Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fall off as far as rankings go for Dustin Poirier, but at the same time, Dustin's already been to the top of the mountain. He kind of understands that his title shot days are over. And at this point, it's all about doing something fun, getting out of your comfort zone. And what better way to do that than to fight the next generation of fighters? And I think Paddy the Baddy, whether you love him or hate him, his skills are becoming undeniable. His record in the UFC is undeniable. And if he keeps going in this direction, I think he winds up in a fight on the tail of the tape with somebody like a Dustin Poirier sooner than a lot of people even realize.
I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Guys, thanks so much for watching this episode. Let us know what you thought of UFC 304, and let us know who you think each of the winners should fight next. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.